The following video is one of the chapters of my Skillshare course on how to read an academic paper. Hopefully it is helpful to you here on YouTube in isolation, but if you click on the link below the video, you can go to the Skillshare course and watch all of the different sections. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is find out where we can source and locate academic papers. So there's going to be a number of different sources, and I'm going to run through a list and then I am going to show you some of the websites for each of these sources. So the first and often easiest source is from databases. So there's a number of databases that link to lots of different journals. Unfortunately, you can normally only get hold of these via an institutional library, so somewhere like a university. Some public libraries do have access, but because they're very expensive, this is not all of that common. So if you are at a university or have access to a university library, they will normally have a page which links to various different databases, and within that you can search for the types of journals or topics or things that you are interested in. If you are not at a university or a higher education institution, then things get a little bit trickier. So we're going to run through a few different other sources, and then once we've got through those sources, if you still don't have any luck with finding a particular article, I have a tip for you that will help very much. Okay, so after databases, the next place we would normally have a look is Google Scholar. So Google has its own specialized search engine for academic research. Google's definition of academic research is a little bit broader than what we would normally expect from the databases at a university, so it will come up with different papers that are just on websites that people have written that are maybe not peer-reviewed or quite as rigorous. It tends to be a bit broader, but it's just free for everyone, like the rest of Google, to jump in there and use. It will give you normally the abstract and authors and a little bit of information about the article, but it won't always give you the article itself. Sometimes when it can, it'll provide a link, but sometimes these end up going behind paywalls. So it may be that you use Google Scholar to find a particular article, but then you need to use other means in order to actually get hold of it and read it. Okay, our next one is PubMed. So a lot of medical journals are more likely to be published in a way where the general public can access them. So PubMed is a website, and it is an index of lots and lots of different medical related journals. So if the topic or the area that you are interested in is medical related, this is definitely somewhere for you to go and search for the topic or search for authors, and hopefully you can find some very useful information with the actual papers themselves being publicly accessible. The next one is called JSTOR. So JSTOR is a digital library. It's been around since the 90s, and it has a mix of paywalled articles but also free articles. The free ones tend to be a little bit older. For those of you that are doing perhaps a master's or a PhD, this can actually be quite useful because it gives you access to articles that have maybe been scanned from papers, say in the 1960s and 1970s. So for my research, I found this was a good place for finding older articles that perhaps were not, because they were so old, were not on some of the paid databases. There's an increasing movement now for what's called open access journals. So here I have a link to a list of lots of different open access journals. An open access journal is a journal where the articles themselves are published in the public domain. So you can go and you can read them. One thing to be a little bit careful of is there is a whole lot of what's called predatory journals where they are very low quality and not very good at all, and they will often parade as open access. And so in a little bit I will talk a little bit more about quality, but basically something we really do need to watch out for is the quality of the journal. So someone could just make a website, invent a name for a journal, and then start publishing, and the content's probably not going to be very good. So when we're dealing with open access, it's really important for us to be able to evaluate the quality. So something that is sometimes useful, not always useful. There's a few different sites like ResearchGate, and these are a little bit like kind of a social media LinkedIn type thing, but for researchers and academics. Sometimes academics will post a draft copy, which doesn't have copyright on it, of their articles on here. So this is a way that you can access articles that are just shared by the authors. It's not really a reliable place for going and just searching, but sometimes it can be an avenue for finding particular articles. Often these will come up in a Google Scholar search or a regular Google search. So my tip that I mentioned earlier is if you can't access, because of paywalls, a particular article, for many articles, in fact most articles and most authors, contact them directly. Sometimes they might have moved institutions, so you may need to do a little bit of detective work to hunt for where they now are to get an email address. But unless they are particularly famous, or I guess maybe a little bit rude, or maybe very busy, most authors are actually quite thrilled when someone contacts them and says, look, I'm really interested in this thing that you wrote. I've seen the title, but I can't access it. Could you please send me a copy? And quite often they will send you a draft copy. So when a journal article gets published, immediately before getting published, you receive a draft copy for you to check and confirm that it's all correct. And so this is something that I still get from my articles, even those that are dating back 15 years ago, and very happy to just send people copies of those. So that's really my number one tip if you can't easily access a journal. Don't do this if you can just download it off the web. Don't be lazy. But if you can't find it anywhere else, most authors are very happy to help you out. Okay, so we quickly want to consider the idea of quality. So there are some journals that are very famous. You might have heard them mentioned in the news a lot. So if we were, say, looking at medicine, journals like the British Medical Journal or Lancet are some of the most well-known journals of academic literature. And so we would generally regard those as being pretty high quality. From there, there's kind of tiers of quality of different journals. Sometimes you can get a good article from a not quite as good journal, but there is a point as you kind of come down the rankings where you're just less likely to get useful information. So there is a number of different metrics that tell us different ways of evaluating a journal. So there's ones called impact factors, another one called citation indices. And if you Google search those, and I will show you a couple of examples, we can see lists of journals, and they are ranked by things like how often they are referenced and cited. And so these are proxies for how good the quality is. If a lot of people are referencing a particular articles in a particular journal, then this would suggest that the quality of them must be pretty good. This is not as helpful for newer journals because they just haven't been around as long. So they may not have been cited very much because they just are very new. In that case, it can be a little bit harder. Really, just looking at a journal website, though, can give you a lot of information. So earlier I mentioned predatory journals. And so these are typically ones where someone's just set up a website and they're really aiming at academics and researchers who are not very good, but have KPIs or are expected to publish their material, but the material can't get published elsewhere. Very often you will see things on the website like $400 and we'll publish your article. So it's kind of a little bit of a pay-to-play model where they will not be particularly critical of your article because you gave them some money. For the top tier journals, this is not the case. Top tier journals, the authors don't get paid, which is a common misperception. So the authors don't get paid, the reviewers don't get paid, but when the author submits their article, they're not having to pay to get it published. There's a few little exceptions, but this is generally the rule. With these predatory journals, they expect you to pay, they don't really review it particularly hard or at all in some cases, and then they just whack it up on their website. So it's more of a money-making venture. Lets people say, oh, I published all of these different articles, or for other people to say they were an editor or they held some sort of position of esteem within an article, within a journal. Quite often you'll see things like spelling mistakes on the websites. If you have a look at a couple of the articles, you'll see the quality is really bad. There'll be typos and grammatical errors and things like that. So really what I'm saying there, the vibe of the website and the vibe of a couple of articles will give you a pretty good indicator of whether the journal is any good or not. For those that are a little bit more established, then you can look at the metrics like the citation indices and the impact factors, and they will help you to decide. Okay, so that's where we can find our papers. Let's have a look now on some of these websites, do a little bit of a tour, and then we will get into some more details on what a paper actually looks like. Thanks for watching this video. Please like and subscribe to support more academic content for Masters and PhD students who are embarking on their research journey. Also, see below the video for links to our YouTube, Facebook community and Skillshare.